Hi, I'm Lizzie, here with my friend Andrea, and we are your hosts for Letting It Percolate. Just as the best tasting coffee takes time to percolate, some of life's most interesting and important questions take time to truly explore. So Andrea, what are we exploring today?
Our question today is, what are the merits of different personality tests? With this question, we have kind of a fun story to open the topic. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and dive into that. So, as some of you may know or have picked up on throughout our podcast, Lizzie and I met during college, and we actually lived in the same dorm, different floors, but same dorm. And toward the end of our freshman year, I think it was finals week, most of the students had gone home, including both of our roommates. So we were each left alone in our rooms. And I think, Lizzie, you just asked if I wanted to come over for a sleepover.
Sleepover!
Yeah! Which was, I don't know. I thought it was kind of fun and funny because we lived in the same building and slept in the same building every day. Or every night. But yeah, I was like, why not? I'm not going to do anything else. Just sit by myself in my room. And so I made the long trek down the hall, down the stairs to Lizzie's room. And I think early on in the evening, you asked me if I had ever taken this test. And the name of it was the Enneagram. And I didn't even know what you said the first time. Like, what word just came out of your mouth? But you explained it a little bit. Like, this is a personality test. There's 9 different types, so on and so forth. And I think you said something kind of like, well, before we do anything else tonight, I'm just going to need you to take this test. And so you pulled it up on, yes, of course. You pulled it up on one of our phones and sat there while watching me while I took it. And it wasn't, I remember the version of the test, and it wasn't like one of those 10 question BuzzFeed quizzes. It was pretty involved.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Gotta get that long test.
Yeah. I would guess it was maybe 80 or so questions. Yeah. So you just sat there patiently as I took this test, and then it gave me my number at the end. I think it maybe gave a top 3 or something, and then we talked about them a little bit and broke it down, and you shared your number and kind of what they meant. So yeah, that was really, for me, kind of my beginning of interest in personality tests. Obviously, Lizzie, you had been into them earlier than I had, but I feel like it's also bonded our friendship. It is a topic of conversation that just naturally comes up sometimes when we're talking. So yeah, obviously that gets us excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, and I'll just say for anyone listening that some people listening may have been similarly subjected to my forcing them to take the various tests. So I did do that, and I was really into forcing people to take tests like that in college, more so than now. I was going a little crazy, but yeah, so that was the Enneagram, and there's other tests, of course. People may be familiar with the Myers-Briggs, so the 4 letters one, DISC. I'm not super familiar with DISC, but a lot of employers I feel use that. Big 5 or Ocean, StrengthsFinder. So there's just a lot out there, and I think it can be a lot to navigate and a lot to sift through, what's up with all this? Is it even legitimate? What's the value of it? So we're going to be processing through some of that in our episode today. We also wanted to just highlight really quick the relevance of personality tests beyond just for fun and among friends in conversation, which that's reason enough for me. But personality tests are used in many other settings, including counseling, hiring, leadership, business. They're getting more into using certain tests, I feel spiritual growth, relationships, teaching. So there's a lot of possible areas of application or relevance, at least.
Just out of curiosity,
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, in any like job or internship that you've had before, have you had to take some kind of personality test as part of your application process?
Okay, short answer is no. Long answer is, for city year, when I did this AmeriCorps program, like, we're all forced to take the Myers-Briggs and, like, share our results, and, like, there's this whole blog forum thing. But that was, like, after we were all hired, like, kind of building the team.
Gotcha.
So it was for a totally different purpose.
It didn't weigh into whether or not you were accepted to the program?
Correct.
Is that
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
One of my brothers just got hired with Toyota, which is, everyone knows Toyota. I don't need to explain. But they also had a personality test. I think it might have been the Enneagram. I don't know.
Really?
I think
that would
take
be
a few
shocking.
Different ones. Maybe it wasn't the Enneagram.
I've never heard of professional organizations using the Enneagram. That would, unless they're, like, religious.
Yeah.
That would be super interesting if they did.
And now that I'm thinking about Toyota's culture, I don't think it was the Enneagram. They're not like that. But
yeah,
I think he had to take some test for them to see if he would fit the culture per se, which is, yeah, that's interesting. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that idea of having a certain test to figure out if someone will fit. But anyhow, yeah, so I know he's had to take one as well, which I find kind of interesting. So it does seem like they're on the rise a little bit in professional contexts.
Yeah, and I think, so for one thing we wanted to talk about kind of first with all of this, and I think a lot of people do think this way, is like, well, are these, there's like however many there are, probably a way larger number than we're even aware of, because there's lots of small ones, but are these tests even, like, valid scientifically? And how do they even know if they're producing meaningful, reliable results? And we just wanted to we don't have all of the answers to that question, but we wanted to kind of raise that question and process it a little bit of, like, are they scientifically valid?
I think this is probably one of the most common criticisms I hear when I'll start to mention any personality test. Yeah, so it warrants some time to consider. In doing a little bit of background research for this episode, I did stumble upon 2 studies that were done related to the Enneagram or over the Enneagram. And the conclusion for one of them I found interesting, the way that it worded it. They were essentially testing for scientific validity, and I think factor analysis was used. I'm not going to lie, I don't totally know what factor analysis means, but anyhow, part of the conclusion was that there is validity to the existence of 9 types, which is like the crux of the Enneagram. But then it went on to caution that the results of the study gave more of a description of what is distinctive about each type rather than a holistic description of each type, if that makes sense. So they were able to find some consistency in how to describe the distinctive features of, like, a number 3 or a number 6, but the study was not claiming to be able to holistically explain, like, this is what a 3 would be like. And I think that makes sense. Like, every single person is unique, and this is another pushback that people will have with personality tests. Don't put me in a box. I'm my own person. And I hear that, and I get that. But I think there's 2 ways or more to look at these. Like, is it telling me who I am in my entirety, or is it telling me these are some of my most prominent tendencies that, like, maybe it would be good and help me be more self-aware if I gave them some thought. So, and then one interesting side note on this particular study that might speak to general interest in personality tests, 70% of the respondents were female. Only 30% were male. So that may have skewed the way that I don't know, the results came out, and also might speak to there could be more interest on the female side of the spectrum than the male side in this topic, or maybe not. This is just one study, but
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And that makes sense, though, the fact that they found like reliability with describing the distinctive aspects of each number, but the fact like that they couldn't holistically consistently describe each number, because for people who are familiar with Enneagram, there is so much like interrelatedness among the numbers. So for example, like if I'll just say 2 because I'm a 2, like if you're a 2, you either have a 1 wing or a 3 wing, and so you can have outward behaviors that look like a 3 or a 1 depending. And then there's also like this stress and growth arrow, so like I can look like a 4 sometimes in stress, and I can look like an 8 in growth, or maybe it's the other way around, actually totally other way around. But like there's a lot of like fluidity there, and so I think that plus what you said, Andrea, of just the obvious fact that we are all individuals, and that me being a 2 looks and someone else being a 2 can look totally different, yet we still would have that same like core fear of being like unwanted, which I'm pretty sure that's the core fear for 2, but I should know that. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, okay, everybody?
You just exposed your like deepest, innermost fears, and they may or may not actually be from the Enneagram.
Right. Yeah, if it's not actually for a 2, then it's just like, oh, that's just me. But my point is that their result makes sense, knowing that the Enneagram like itself doesn't claim to be doesn't claim to be like all 3s are the same. Like you couldn't holistically describe a 3 accurately because there's so many other factors at play.
Right. I'm curious, Lizzie, because it sounds like you're somewhat familiar with the Big 5 / Ocean. Where does that test stand in terms of scientific validity?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, the Big 5 is the only like personality construct test that researchers consistently like use and regard as valid and reliable. Part of that is how science research works and funding and stuff, and Big 5 / Ocean research gets a lot of funding because it's already demonstrated some validity and reliability. But it's interesting because the Big 5, so for people who are unfamiliar, it refers to 5 traits, and they are the acronym OCEAN. So openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and negative emotionality, and which used to be referred to as neuroticism. And it's the same construct, they just decided to change the name, I think.
Slightly less loaded terminology.
Right. So basically you take a test, an assessment for that, and you get a percentile ranking along those 5 traits. So it's like less catchy and fun than like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, where there's like an acronym and names and like numbers, and it's just like you get a percentile on a trait. But I feel like there's a substantial body of research to back up the like validity and reliability of the Big 5.
Have you personally taken a Big 5 test?
I have. Multiple times.
Which of the 5 aspects do you rank in the highest percentile on?
My highest one is openness to experience. Yes, and that refers to and these are all going to be like not perfect definitions because I'm just speaking off the cuff, but that refers to like, so people who are super artistic, who are like to look at abstract pieces of art and like think about all of the possible interpretations that piece could have, like that would be one example of a way that trait could be displayed, because you have this openness to like, it could be this, it could be that, it's totally gray area, and versus some people are more like prefer black and white or like more structured. Another part of openness to experience is just like seeking out, it's kind of obvious, like seeking out new things, a preference for that over a preference for staying with what you know. And again, I'm just gonna give a fifth caveat that I'm not an expert. I feel like that's necessary, but yeah.
Okay.
Have you taken the Big Five?
No, I've not. I think really, maybe I heard about it like once or twice in college, but I think you're probably the primary source I have for information on the Big Five.
Oh, that's not good. You need to diversify. I don't want to.
I do need to diversify. It's a good call out. I would guess that compared to you, I'm much lower on the openness to new. Was it openness to new experiences? Is that what it was?
They didn't have new in there, just openness to experience.
Okay, openness to experience. I am probably less so. And the first example that comes to mind is, like, if I go to a restaurant and I find something I like the first time I go there, it is incredibly difficult for me to order anything else because I just have this bar of expectation. And this is me, like, spitballing, I guess, but with a lower openness to experience, the possibility of risking less satisfaction with the meal the second time around ordering something different versus the possible reward of getting something that's even more satisfying, because I'm lower in openness to experience, I would just rather go with like what I know versus what I don't, like what is certain versus take the risk. That's like one small example, and I'm trying to work on it.
Yeah, and
we'll
that
talk
could be
a little bit later about
useful trait though, in certain contexts.
Right, and we'll talk about later the idea of like growing also in personality. I don't want to get there too early, but yeah, for me that's an area of personal growth. Like flexibility and adaptation have never been strengths.
Yeah, so the Big Five is one that stands out as like, I don't think a lot of people would contest that it is more scientifically, I guess you could just say there's a lot more research that has shown that it's valid and reliable than the others. The Myers-Briggs, I think, somewhat famously has not been shown to be reliable in that, like, people can test over time and get different results. That's another criticism people have of personality tests, is like, well, like, today I feel like I'm an extrovert, tomorrow I might feel like I'm an introvert. Like, I get that, but I also think that most of the time personality tests are not claiming to represent that type of change, but something more fundamental that is largely unchanging.
I guess, like, these caveats in mind, do you still think there is some kind of utility or value to personality tests? And maybe specifically not the Big Five ocean test, but to the Enneagram, to the Myers-Briggs, what would you say?
I would say that they can still have utility when viewed rightly. Like, when you view them not as kind of what you were saying, people sometimes slip into of, this is who I am. Like, I am an ENFJ, and that is, like, the totality of my essence. I think as long as you stay away from that, like, black and white territory, you have the freedom to use, like, knowledge of yourself and also knowledge of other people, to understand yourself and others better. I think it's kind of like we have the agency as humans. We have the agency to just, like, hear things and then choose, like, oh, I'm going to use this in this way, but I'm not going to view it as, like, an all-defining aspect of my identity.
I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Like, if there's something else in life that relates in the way taking a personality test does to evaluating one's like whole being or whole self. I'm coming up short.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can think of?
I don't have a good analogy for that specifically. I feel like there is one. The only analogy I can think of, and this is slightly getting at it differently, is like a toolbox, which that analogy is like way overused, but that's just because it's a good analogy. Overused in like other contexts, I mean. But like personality knowledge, within different like frameworks can be like a toolbox. You can just use the right one for the right time, right tool for the right job. But that's not exactly what your question is, and I think that's an analogy probably exists. I would like to find it.
Yeah, let's keep thinking on that one. Maybe before the end of the episode we'll have something.
Yeah,
maybe not. No promises. Well, this is an interesting, I guess, subtopic under the category of personality tests. So, different biases that we may bring to a personality test as we're taking it, or maybe after taking it and reviewing the results. So, a few of the biases that we came up with, and by we, I mean Lizzie, let's be honest. She is a psychology major, and yes. Anyhow, so confirmation bias was one of them. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's like we're looking for something that will confirm a belief we already hold about ourselves.
Basically. Yeah.
Would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's a good like overarching definition.
So, okay,
like, sorry, I'll just
No.
I say
Please
no
add.
and then I say
Please
yes.
do add.
I would just add like how it ends up playing out is we place extra weight on these things that we were already hoping to see, and we place less weight on these other things, and so our perception words is therefore skewed because we've placed so much heavy weight on these things that we were already hoping to see anyway, and so then it's just confirming what we were basically thinking, which is what you said, leaving us blind to these other areas that maybe they're even bigger than the things we were confirming, but we're so blind to it because of confirmation bias that we're not seeing it.
I can remember a time in high school my parents had me take this like career assessment, and it wasn't a personality test. It was obviously more career oriented, but I do remember there being quite a few questions like, what would you rather do? Calculate numbers or grow a garden? I don't know. Stuff like that. And
yeah.
I went into that test already thinking I'm going to study accounting in college because some of my family members did that, and that's what I thought made sense. And so I just remember as I took that test basically choosing every option that was like anything remotely accounting. And I don't know, it was hard to take that test with that like idea already in my mind. I think I want to study accounting. I think there's definitely some confirmation bias going on there in the way that I answered, because it was kind of blatant too. Like, unlike personality, which is a little bit more abstract, it was very concrete. Like I said, do you want to plant flowers and grow a garden, or do you want to calculate numbers? Like, duh, I want to calculate numbers. Is that even a question? I'm sure many other people would be like, no, I will grow zucchinis and squash before I will open a calculator. Open a calculator? Who opens calculators? Anyhow, you know what I'm saying.
My calculator had a cover that you had to open.
That's true. Some of them did slide out. My dad had a really old one that kind of looked like a wallet.
Yeah,
that opened
I love those.
Like that direction.
They're so fun. And you can press all the buttons at once if you push down on the cover really hard.
Yes, maximum utility right there. Okay, another bias that was brought up is social desirability bias. that one maybe is a little more intuitive. I think, again, feel free to add to this. I think this is kind of, well, I know that like my friend group or peers or just culture in general would affirm these kinds of traits. And so these are things that I want to be who I am, or how like my test results come out. So something that would be socially advantageous, or if you like believe in a social hierarchy, this would move me up the hierarchy, or, you know, something like that.
So other contexts, it can be more touchy, I feel like, because it's things like, well, I don't want to say that like some races are better than others because obviously socially it's not acceptable to say that. Like that's a really blatant example of a social desirability bias. But in the context of personality stuff, I think that you're right. It also comes out there, and like a brief illustration would be, in some ways society does seem to like praise extroversion a little bit more. And so I remember like taking personality tests in high school of my own accord because I'm a nerd.
Because I'm a nerd.
And being like insecure every time I would have to answer one of those questions about like, would you rather read a book or go to a party? And I remember like really struggling to answer it honestly, like as I'm consciously aware that I was like, I don't really know, like I kind of like staying home, but like I feel like I should go to a party because I'm a high schooler. You know, so it definitely plays into personality tests as well.
I'm gonna piggyback off of this. Hopefully it's not too big of a rabbit trail, but the introversion extroversion lens as it pertains to social desirability, I personally feel that society caters to extroverts a little bit more and like presents that as being more desirable. I've also experienced pretty much what you described of sitting there and thinking, well, which would I rather do? Like, stay at home and watch a movie, or go out to have dinner, and like hang out with friends or something. Like, what's gonna look better on my Instagram feed? That definitely that thought has crossed my mind. But then if I really let myself get to the heart of it, 9 times out of 10, I would much rather be at home, watching a movie, reading a book, whatever. And I hate that even in my own brain, there's that stigma of why is there something that's a little bit better or like a little bit more praiseworthy about extroversion than introversion. Again, it might be a personal thing, or like a vendetta I have as a slightly more introverted person. I do, though, going off of this, I do remember listening to a TED Talk by Brene Brown a few years ago where she was discussing introversion and extroversion and the education system, and how, at least in like public school settings, there does tend to be this catering to or preference given to extroverts. If you think about like group projects that are pretty prevalent pretty much all the way through school, I would say, maybe a little bit depending on your major in college, but like group projects are definitely a thing. Even the way that people are oriented, like I know in some classes, some years, specifically elementary school, we'd have like groupings of desks, so you're kind of with a cluster of people versus like individual desks scattered throughout the room. And she made some interesting points that if we're really trying to inspire learning and like mental development, putting an introvert in a group with 4 extroverts who are all gonna conceivably be like processing verbally or gathering their energy from the group discussion, that might actually be shutting the introvert's thought process down. Like that might be a little bit of overstimulation for the introvert, and they may need some quiet time alone to read or to reflect, and that might be the setting where they come up with their they're new ideas, or where they finally grasp a concept. So, I mean, that's not to say that all of our education system is like social and involves group work, but yeah, I definitely can see elements of that, and I think it's just kind of an interesting thing to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's been talk about that in the workplace too, in some circles where people are like, in cubicle type offices, or like, no, not, I'm sorry, not cubicles, in like the type of workplace that would be like a Google, where it's like fun and innovative and new and just like no walls. And I've obviously never been inside of Google, but my cartoon image in my mind is like there's no walls, or it's like glass, and you can just like flow and see, and then go on a slide, and then like, oh, I have a new idea.
And everyone actually travels on magic carpets. They float down the halls.
Oh, yeah. And I don't say any of that to be offensive. I say it because I think it's fun. I would love working in a place like that.
Google is legit.
But some people, and this goes into actually how workplaces can use personality tests, and like should they or should they not, and when and how, because like someone who's very strongly introverted and produces their best work largely alone, is not going to thrive in that type of setup where they can't get alone. Mm-hmm. And I know I typically test as an extrovert, but I am very close to the middle, and I've been in work type situations where there's like, I'm in a setting where there's basically no feasible alone time, like alone space whatsoever. And that has been extremely stressful for me. And I can imagine if I was a stronger preference for introvert than I am, it would even be more stressful probably. So that's another example of how these personality things can be used beneficially in designing a workplace or hiring the right people. Knowing yourself where to apply even.
What are your thoughts on, for example, a company only accepting a certain type of person as described by these tests? Like, do you think in the long run it would be beneficial for a company to hire strictly introverts? I don't know. What do you think?
I obviously depends on the company, because if you say company and you're talking about like a very, very, very small company, my answer might differ. But generally speaking, I would say homogeneity is a weakness in that sense. I mean, there are obvious pitfalls to having like 100% introverts, and there's obvious pitfalls to having 100% extroverts in really any setting, but especially if you're talking about work and like productivity and value.
I actually disagree. Introverts can rule the world. We can get stuff done, let me tell you.
But you could possibly get more stuff done if you have like a influx of like energy and ideas and like things that you push you out of your comfort zone.
Yes,
which an
this
extrovert
is very true.
Very well may do. And the flip side of that is true too. Like a group of total extroverts can be pushed to introspect and like take quiet, and ideas and can come to you in moments of quiet that may not come to you in moments of brainstorming as a group, even if you're an extrovert. So, but to answer your question, I've only heard of workplaces using like more broadly, not saying this is the one type of person we will accept and this is the only type of person we've ever hired. Obviously never heard of that, but I think using it as a guide can be helpful, especially for large organizations who do get hundreds of applications, who do know like, well, someone who's super, super shy, they have strengths in areas that like are not at our organization. Like we might need a different type of person, and they might thrive in a different setting. It's not to say that they don't have strengths. It's just to say that it wouldn't be a good match. And so they could easily just, through the bots of personality stuff that you would do pre-HR contact even, filter out. And I hate that though, because I love like the personal aspect of like applying and hiring. I feel like I don't want to interact with a computer in that process. Yet I understand why it has to be a reality sometimes.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't love like the bot system or the way that these application softwares can like screen or comb through looking for keywords, and therefore when you're in career prep classes they tell you to insert these key buzzwords.
And it's such a facade.
It starts to get very much like a strategy game to me, and I think that's why I don't like it. Save that for Settlers of Catan. Like, don't use that in your hiring process.
And then it's like, are they actually looking not for the people who they purport to be looking for through these traits, but are they actually looking for the people with enough strategy to get through that bot system no matter what their personality is? That's a super interesting possibility. Probably not, but...
Whoa, okay. My mind just got blown a little bit. Yeah, like, what if that was the goal the whole time? Like, we're not really interested in anyone actually having these experiences, or, like, this English lexicon. We're most interested in who can game our system, because maybe that's what the job will require. I don't know. I think that's unlikely, but I could see it as a possibility.
Oh, man. Yes. Well, there's a new conspiracy theory. You heard it here first. Probably not, though. It's probably
from the
already
percolators.
Oh, the percolators. Oh.
Well, okay. Maybe let's switch gears a bit, because I think this is an interesting question. Thinking about the scope of personality tests, what can they capture and what can't they capture? And I guess one thing that I can start us off with is I do think particularly the Myers-Briggs can capture thinking, like natural thinking leaning people versus feeling leaning people fairly well. I guess it could depend on the day a little bit. Maybe I'm going to eat my words here. But I think that has been personally as well as relationally helpful for me to be aware of how people process information and like make decisions and take action. Is it based on like an emotion and a feelings oriented connection, or is it based on like logic or rational thinking or pros and cons? So yeah, I guess that's one way that I can see personality tests capturing. I don't know. I'm really not convinced. As I'm saying this, I'm like,
like
no,
talking
I've
yourself out of
definitely
it.
taken the Myers-Briggs on different days and gotten thinking and gotten feeling. I tend toward thinking, obviously, but I don't know. Do you have something to weigh in on this one?
Yeah. I'm gathering my thoughts because they're all over the place.
Yes, do gather. Take it down. Internally process if you must.
Right. Yeah, I think building off what you were saying of like understanding, like you lean more towards T thinking, in sort of your preferential like ways of dealing with information and dealing with the world. I tend to lean more towards F or feeling. But I think, and so if the question is like, what can they capture? I think in some like hazy, like dotted line sense, like the Myers-Briggs can capture these constructs, even though it's not like, as you noted, not super reliable based on your mood or when you take the test. I think this is a little bit different, but that and other traits that I don't like have a preference toward, I've in all of my exploration of personality stuff, I'm able to understand more, kind of like what you were saying of, oh, someone else who's very different than me, like this is how they're working through things, seeing the world, perceiving things, integrating information, etc. And being able to put words to that and see it as valid, as opposed to seeing it as like annoyingly different, has been, this is like different than the question you asked, but I think personality tests, if nothing else, they can provide like alternative ways that people are in the world, and therefore they can help us be more like understanding, even if the tests themselves or even the constructs themselves aren't the most ideally like clinical and like black and white. I think that if you zoom out, what these tests provide can be so useful in that way.
Yeah. I think specifically with the Enneagram, I'm probably just saying that because it's the one I'm most familiar with. It's been hugely beneficial for helping me get to that point you were just describing, that not all people are the same. And rather than being irritated and annoyed when people respond in a way that personally I wouldn't respond, I think it's helped me be more aware that, oh, I can at least understand where they're coming from. Maybe understand's a little bit too strong, but I have a hunch about where they're coming from. And sometimes that can generate more compassion or grace.
Mm-hmm.
I just happen to have a lot of 2 friends, and I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you, but but it's genuinely the truth. I have a lot of 2 friends, and 2s are, I think the name like most commonly given is the helper.
Mm-hmm.
But I love so many things about the 2s, and one of them is that helping aspect, that it's actually like very purposeful and meaningful for them to get to help others, especially in their time of need. And I can think of one of my roommates who I think is a little bit maybe undecided about what she is. I definitely think she's a 2, but that's up to her to decide. And again, it's not like a set in stone thing. It's definitely more of a tendency. But there's been a few moments, crisis moments, where I've locked myself out of my car or forgotten something important, and I always feel like I'm burdening her when I ask for help, but she just seems genuinely so excited to be able to help, like to be able to fill that role and meet the need. And I see that with her in a lot of people in her circles as well. Like she takes so much joy and gets so much meaning and fulfillment out of being able to help meet people's needs and being flexible for them. And also she's like very eager to just stop what she's doing and listen when someone needs to talk. And I love that about her. And also I think that's true of most of the other 2s that I'm thinking of. So I guess, yeah, distilling that, sometimes in my oneness it seems inefficient to me to stop. Like, if I'm being honest, it seems inefficient to stop what I'm doing to help someone or to meet this need, especially if it's not planned. It's hard for me to do that. But knowing some 2s and knowing that this is not an excuse, by the way, to go out and just ask a lot of all the 2s in everyone's lives, but I guess just knowing that that's not the way they see it. Like, they don't see it as, for the most part, oh, these are people and they're just like burdening me and disrupting my schedule. It's like, no, they actually, like, they love to help, and that brings them joy. So I don't know, that's just one difference that I've noticed between ones and twos that the Enneagram has helped me see in different people around me.
Yeah. That's a good example of, like, in a positive way of, like, you understanding that when you reach out to someone for help, they might not necessarily be immediately like, what a burden.
Exactly.
Because
and I'm ashamed to say that I do think that sometimes. But
no.
yeah.
Well, I don't think you're alone in that. And I would add as a two that twos sometimes think that too. But, like, healthy, when you're in a healthy place and, you know, all things being equal overall, yeah, I would echo what you said as being true of twos. And it's cool to develop all of these, like, other ways of viewing the world. Like, I truly only have my way, but I can conceptualize all these other ways. Like, I know you and other people in my life are a 1 or a 3, and all the way up through 9 on the Enneagram. And it's really cool to be able to learn and kind of, like, put yourself in their shoes, I guess, and have a robust system to do so. You're not just randomly trying to empathize. You have, like, well, as a 1, what's the core? The core desires to be good or
yes.
right. And so, yeah, just helpful to put words to these things to aid understanding.
Can you think of any specific limitations of personality tests? I think we definitely implied that there are some.
Yeah.
But I guess any cautions or points where it's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't take it quite this far.
There's a lot. The overarching one that I would say, and a lot of what I'm about to say, words. A lot of what I'm about to say is to my past self, because I think that I used to put way too much credence and stock into personality tests. The test is basically, like, okay, I'm gonna try to illustrate a picture as an analogy. It may fail though, but, like, if you're standing, like, out in a field alone, like in a dark field, and you're just standing, you have one flashlight from, like, at a certain angle shining on you, and
are you holding the flashlight?
No, it's held by an invisible force.
Okay. Makes sense.
Obviously.
Continue.
Well, I don't know why I didn't specify that. It's just, like, out there, you know. Elevating.
Eliminating?
What's that word? Elevating? Meditating? It's like hovering? I don't know what word I'm trying to think of. Get the gist. Floating. Yeah, and it's shining on you at a particular angle, and whatever it's shining on, that's, like, there's some trueness to whatever is being revealed, but it's just that angle. And then there's a different flashlight at a different angle, coming from somewhere else in the field, that's also shining on you, and it looks pretty different. And it's not a perfect analogy, because all analogies break down at some point, but that's kind of a way that I think of these different tests. Like, they're just providing different types of information. And I think it's healthier to view it that way, and to view it almost at arm's length of, like, I can use this if I want to, but this doesn't have to be, like, a descriptor of my fundamental identity. And I think it can be, like, there are definitely elements of these tests that I'm like, yeah, that's, like, essential to who I am. But the test itself, I don't think I need to elevate to that level, just because there are so many flaws, as we've talked about. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
I don't know that I have anything new to add. I think maybe another important aspect in this conversation about limitations of these tests is growth opportunities from these tests. I think it would be dangerous for us to take a certain test and say, well, I'm really low in, I don't know, was conscientiousness one of the... Yeah. I'm really low in conscientiousness. Therefore, I will always be very low in conscientiousness. I'm just not going to be an aware and considerate person as I go about my life. Like, that's probably dangerous. But I think we can take something like that, knowing that we have certain predispositions as people, and some of that's genetic, some of it's environmental, but we can still take that and consider, how could I grow in being more conscientious? Does this require me asking some people around me for times that they notice I'm kind of checked out or oblivious, and like being open to feedback on that. I'm trying to think of another example. Maybe with thinking and feeling, like if we tend more toward the feeling end of the spectrum, are there ways that I can learn to also apply a framework of like maybe more objectivity to evaluating a situation? Like not losing my connection to my emotions and becoming dispassionate, but considering, I don't know, like a pro and cons list when decision making, or of course I'm going to say this, an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes. I was hoping you would.
Because it has to be name dropped at least once.
Once per episode.
Once per episode.
We are not paid. Not that they need our help, but...
They really don't. The Sinkies, on the other hand.
Oh, Sinkies.
We love the Sinkies. We should get t-shirts. That would be great, actually.
That'd be so fun. Oh.
But, okay, you get the gist. Like, yeah, I just think, really, in any situation, there's a way we can grow in a specific quality, and we can use these personality tests to be more aware of those areas where growth could happen.
Yeah.
And some of the things are very neutral. Like, what we were talking about with introversion and extroversion. Like, okay, yeah, much to my disdain, it seems like there is a little bit more desirability for extroversion, but really that's neutral. There is nothing better or worse about being introverted or extroverted. So, I mean, yeah, as an introvert, it's probably good for me to be uncomfortable sometimes and like put myself out in situations when I much rather would prefer to sit at home. And I guess that's growth, but the ultimate goal isn't to become an extrovert.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of an advocate for growth and change, even though I'm really bad at that myself, as I said at the beginning. So, or at least I'm not where I would want to be with that. So yeah, that's another characteristic or aspect of this conversation that I think is important.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a super helpful, like, way to wield these personality tests to our benefit. And I think it was a good caveat that you said of not saying, like, oh, well, I'm a blank, and so excuse my whatever poor behavior. Like, that's just how I am. Like, again, just going back to myself, like, as a 2, Enneagram, like, the helper likes to, like, relational, whatever. If I, am, like, super clingy towards someone, and it's, like, detrimental and or annoying, I don't want to just be like, well, I'm a 2, so what do you expect? Like, I want to take that and use that, like you said, as an opportunity to grow. And it's possible to do that while still being true to yourself and not, like you said, changing from, for example, like an introvert to an extrovert, but rather just becoming more, like having a more robust tool belt of ways to interact with the world.
The toolbox
to
analogy.
use the... Oh, I was like, I don't want to say this. I don't want to say... I said it.
Hey, no worries. At least you had an analogy. I still can't come up with a good one for personality tests to actual person.
Okay, wait. What's the question again that we're trying to find an analogy for? Just to be clear.
I think what I said was like, what is a personality test as like paired with an entire person?
Okay.
Like their entire being.
Personality test is to actual human as...
You know what? Your flashlight analogy kind of, I think, gets at what I was trying to get at. Like, I think that's pretty
personality test is to actual human as levitating. That's the verb. Levitating flashlight in a dark field, shining on a human, is to human.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
Perfect. Seamless analogy.
Another one I guess I thought of as you were talking about the flashlight one is the elephant one that's often used in regard to like religion.
Yeah.
And
I think I totally ripped off of that when I was like coming up with my quote unquote unique.
I think yours is better. I like yours better. I think for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, the elephant analogy is like, well, what if there's like a whole elephant, but there's different people and they're representing different religions, I guess, and they're each touching a different part of the elephant. So maybe one's
and they're all
touching...
blind.
Yes, thank you. Important component. They are all blind. And one's touching the trunk and saying, oh, it's like long and it's kind of rough. And then someone's touching the foot and they're like, oh, it feels kind of like a rock and it's really flat. And I don't really know elephant anatomy, but you get the point. They're all touching the same elephant, but they don't know it because the components they're touching are different. And sometimes people use that in reference to different religions, like getting at the same thing. That's not a conversation we're having right now, but anyhow, I like your analogy better, Lizzie. Let's go with that.
Wow. Thank you. I accept the compliment.
Well, guys, this has been, hopefully for you, I know for me, it's been a great conversation. Good to process through some of this stuff, and probably gonna go take an Ocean's personality test.
Yes, I'll send you the link.
Pretty soon after we finish. Yes, please do.
My classic line.
Thanks for tuning in to Letting It Percolate. We hope that you connected with what we talked about in today's episode and that your thoughts have been sufficiently percolated. In the next episode, we'll ask the question, what makes someone influential? And we hope that you'll join us for that. So that's all we have. We'll talk to you next time.